Welcome, everybody, to our continuing discussion where we talk to professors, writers, reporters, columnists, philosophers, activists, anybody who has an opinion on political division in America from a more thoughtful perspective. We want to bring the information directly to you, the public, so that you could do this thing that was popular when I was in high school. It's not that popular now. It's called thinking for yourself. And maybe we'll have a renaissance with that. Maybe we won't. This is our first twofer. We're going to have two professors for one interview. So this is a historic moment for the interview series. This is our first twofer. With us today is Ann M. Oberhauser and Daniel Krier. They are both professors of sociology, and they both work at Iowa State University. And they both seem to like each other because they work on a couple studies together. Dr. Oberhauser is a professor of sociology at Iowa State University. Her research focuses on feminist economic geography, gender and globalization, and critical development studies with an emphasis on rural economic strategies in Appalachia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Midwest. She holds a PhD in geography from Clark University. Before moving to Ames, Iowa, was professor in the Department of Geology and Geography at West Virginia University. Oberhauser's scholarship draws heavily from interdisciplinary feminist research and scholarships that engage with livelihoods, community-based development, and gender issues in the global South and global North. Her books include the co-edited Bridging Worlds, Building Feminist Geographies, Essays in Honor of Janice Monk, co-authored Feminist Spaces, Gender and Geography in the Global Context, and co-edited with Abipo Johnston Anu Monwo, Global Perspectives on Gender and Space. In collaborating with sociology colleagues, Oberhauser has worked on projects exploring the political culture of the Midwest, and specifically how populism and nativism are evident in recent pivotal elections. That's what we're going to be focused on today. Professor Krier co-organized and hosted the 2016 International Social Theory Consortium in Ames and organizes an ongoing series of symposia on new directions in critical social theory that bring sociologists, philosophers, cultural theorists, and political scientists to Iowa State University for intense, focused exchange of ideas. Articles by Dan on critical social theory and political economy have been published in Critical Sociology, Current Perspectives in Social Theory, American Journal of Economics and Sociology, Fast Capitalism, Continental Thought and Theory, Logos, Journal of Rural Social Studies, and Sociology Quarterly. Most recently, Dan published Political Moderation and Polarization in the Heartland, Economics, Rurality, and Social Identity in the 2016 presidential election. We'll be looking at that today. Dan has received numerous teaching awards, including the Early Achievement Teaching Award from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Department of Sociology's Bogardus Award, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Introductory Teaching Award, and was named the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Shakes Haft Master Teacher in Humanities and Social Sciences. Dan teaches a variety of courses from large enrollment introduction sessions to distance learning. We'll leave it there. Today, we wanted to talk about this study, and I just found out from the professors, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but it's true. I did not know this other study had come out. We will also be covering this one, Populism and Identity Politics in the U.S. Heartland, that came out in 2022. As I understand, I might be getting this wrong, the professors are saying that's a sequel to this study, Political Moderation and Polarization in the Heartland, Economics, Rurality, and Social Identity in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. But first, let me turn to the professors. Did I say anything wrong? Do we need to correct something about the bio? Was there something we need to change or get out now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you wish, you could do a more Germanic pronunciation of my last name, Krier. Could we do it?
Krier. Krier.
But that's fine. I answer to almost anything. So.
No, is that German?
Yeah, it is actually Luxembourgian, but that's fine. And German's good, so that's good.
Luxembourg. My father served in Germany in NATO, yeah. So I know. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? No. Okay.
But honestly, I really do respond to almost anything. So
we're going to go with Krier, Professor Oberhauser and Professor Krier. If the introductions are correct, tell me what this study was in 2016. We'll get to the other study in 2022, but the question I want to ask you is the one I ask all the professors. Please answer as both an academic and as an American with two working eyeballs. Why did you write this study? And why did you think it was important to do this in 2019? What was going on then? Why was this an important topic then?
Go ahead. Perhaps, maybe underneath the study was an interest that Anne, as a geographer, a political geographer, and myself share, which is where we've both been interested in kind of the spatialization of culture and of value systems. I'm still working on a book that I started about the time that we started this study on tracing sort of different religious value systems. And just to be real blunt, I was really interested in the historic North, South, East, West divisions in America, the sections North, South, the Civil War, and then the kind of the East-West divisions as well, the frontier. And different kinds of culture, even different kinds of religion that find themselves sort of institutionalized in law, institutionalized in even like the built environment in each of these different places. Iowa has, in sort of political geography, Iowa has long been a kind of exemplar of a kind of northern, we're Western to a degree, but kind of northern in political value. It's a kind of communitarian value system, would probably be the best way to put it. Historically, Iowa has been a place where something like cultural diversity mattered. Communities, again, this was a northern state. It doesn't have the legacy of slavery. It's not a Western state. So it had a kind of a communitarian basis, and it was first in the nation in terms of the presidential primary season
Right.
for about 45 or 50 years. With the Iowa caucuses, which were different than primaries because people came together in small groups and talked and shared ideas and tried to convince each other and so on. So so perhaps the second word in the title is actually what links Anne and I together, which is an interest in moderation. So polarization, is really this division, this growing division in value systems and political orientations. But moderation is really what Iowa historically, and especially like the political geography literature, was noted for. Moderation. So what is moderation? Political moderation is really the capacity for, members of a citizenry or of a body politic to communicate across differences, right? So political moderates aren't people that are lukewarm, but they're people who occupy a position where they can mediate between a wide variety of positions and talk through them, talk about them. So Iowa was a place that valued moderation. It doesn't mean lukewarm. It was a place that valued moderation, which meant that something like engaging in inclusive discourse, listening, understanding, valuing people despite having opposing viewpoints and so on, being able to sort of shake hands at the end of a dispute and be able to live and work alongside of each other. The way I teach it is, Iowa was the kind of place where people who are very different can work together, right? I may not agree with you. I may have a different notion of God than you, but I can work with you. And that was basically the Iowa way, right? And again, it's pretty well documented in the literature, kind of, right? So we were a bit surprised by the outcome of the 2016 election, and the polling didn't show the real strong win for Donald Trump that he wound up obtaining here. Donald Trump hadn't, I got to remember this right now, in 2016, he didn't win the Iowa caucuses. I think the winner in 2016 was Ted Cruz. And is that correct? I think that's right. Yeah, I think that is right. So he didn't seem to have a kind of runaway win going into the primaries. Only a couple of polls that showed it. But in the end, Iowa was one of the states that swung the most. So after having voted for Barack Obama twice,
2008, 2012.
yeah, we wound up having about a 10-point spread between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So, there's regional differences even within Iowa. Different parts of Iowa have different kind of cultural heritage and cultural backgrounds. But it's probably a less gerrymandered state than most. There's only 4 congressional districts and so on. So it seemed like a good place to sort of understand the changes that were evidenced in the MAGA movement, in the 2016 election. We were very interested in what happened in 2018, 2020, right? So this doesn't seem to be a one-off. This seems to be like something like a real change in the underlying political culture here, at least in Iowa, and in other some sort of the rural Midwest. So does that do enough? So
yeah, but before we go, just to be fair, Professor Oberhauser do you agree? I'm sorry, I have to do this. You're both here.
Yeah.
Why don't you ask her? And especially my mom's watching this, so I got to be on the P's and Q's, okay?
Absolutely.
So Professor Oberhauser, is that how you felt? Is that what motivated you to do this study? You could say yes, or you could disagree, whatever you want. I had to ask.
No. I appreciate the gender balance here. And so I think I was going to add to some of Dan's earlier points, especially in how he came into this kind of from this cultural, more sociological, political perspective. And I do have the geography background, and I do in human geography. I look at place, I look at identity, and I look at how people identify with their place. Places shape people, and of course, people shape places. But I find this particularly within Iowa, within parts of the Midwest. I'm originally from the Midwest, as is Dan. And I think place is really important to people. And that plays out in terms of the political landscape, economic, social landscape, as Dan was talking about with religion, etc. So, I think it's really interesting, again, to pick up on this shift that's taken place in the last decade, is how kind of this place is kind of transformed, and through politics, but I also think through social and cultural dimensions of this broader region. And I think you asked the question, maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit, but you asked the question.
That's okay.
Has this changed? And I don't know, I think even it's more entrenched. Some of the polarization that we saw in the 2016, 2020 is even more entrenched now, or at least through legislation and through some of the bills that are being passed, particularly in Iowa, but in other parts of the country as well. There's some very kind of aggressive and conservative social issues and bills that are being passed. So
let me ask you about the study. We'll get to that in a second. But to be fair, Professor Krier, I'm sorry. This is a twofer. Bear with me. It's my first twofer. Professor Krier. By the way, my stepdad is German. His last name is Hirschbach, and they can trace the name to a part of a riverbank in Germany. So just putting that out there. Like my mom's Mexican, my dad's German, and she goes, well, let's find our name. And so they went looking for Ruiz. There's a million. We can't we trace it till it's someplace in Mexico. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Professor Krier, I'm sorry.
I agree with Ann, and the place attachment is very strong here, and I think place attachment is much stronger in rural parts of the world in general, in rural parts of America, than it is in some and urban areas. People don't move as often, right? And they can trace their family back generations, often on a single piece of land, in a single town. People know your name, they know your reputation by name, and so on. So it's a different thing. The pride, you drive around Iowa yet, the pride that Iowans show for their town. We have 99 counties. We have extension agents. That's who actually helped us, the county extension agent, to do our focus group interviews. And there's just tremendous pride and sense of attachment, right? That shows itself in in these rural parts of America. So that's, again, kind of why we were surprised to see things change so dramatically. And you would think that there would be a kind of consistency across time in terms of the orientation of politics. And then to see, and to, ultimately not in this study, but in the other one, we talked to people and interviewed them about the changes that were underway in their towns and communities that seemed to explain either why it was happening, or that people talked about the impact of the increasing polarization on their communities, right? That kind of thing. So really, I agree with. I mean, Ann and I've talked so much about this. There's nothing Ann could say I wouldn't agree with him.
I know you guys are in depth with the conversation. You've known each other for a few years. I just got to parse it out so that nobody can go, well, you didn't ask the other professor. You don't know. You can say both of them said that. I got them both saying that.
In general, we can actually say this. In general, everything good about this work is Ann. If there's mistakes, it was me. So we'll just get that.
Okay. Let me ask you about the actual research. So if I can, I'd like to read the background of that study. The 2016 U.S. presidential election was a watershed event that signaled decreasing political moderation and increasing partisan polarization, authoritarianism, and ethno-nationalism. Iowa, located at the center of the American heartland, swung to the political right more than any other state. Multivariate regression analysis of county-level data is used to determine the relative contribution of factors reputed to have caused voters to support Trump: rurality, economic distress, and social identity. However, we find that rurality and social identity, but not economic distress, were significantly correlated with Iowa's swing to Trump. Polarization along these social divisions must be addressed if the heartland is to return to political moderation. So, are you saying a lot of people voted for Trump? I know my stepdad, I don't like Trump. My mom doesn't either, but he voted for him for economics. But it sounds like what you're saying is that while economics is an issue, maybe a lot of people voted for him. When we get to the heartland, it's a little bit different. There's more of a concern about social identity, the identities attached to kind of a rural geography. And that was the primary motivator for why people voted for Trump. Am I getting this wrong?
Yeah, I think that there's, rural people, probably particularly farmers, people in agriculture, can really identify with the land. As Dan was saying, goes back multiple 3, 4, 5 generations in some cases. So they're really attached to the land. And in many senses, they're opposed to or threatened by change.
Mm-hmm.
You just get kind of stuck. This is the way parents, grandparents, great-grandparents farmed land, dealt with the cattle, etc. And we were kind of observing too with our interviews is rural people are threatened by this change. So land ownership is changing dramatically. There's more consolidation of big agriculture and big farms. People are threatened by that. There's an influx of migrant labor. So in the meatpacking plants, parts of Waterloo, parts of Storm Lake, places in the Northeast, Northwest, a lot of influx of migrant labor, which is necessary for the agriculture and for those sectors. But nonetheless, people are threatened by that because their schools are changing and there's dual or bilingual, in education or in the schools that are needed. So those kind of, both the social, kind of those rural things are overlapping. And of course with the MAGA and with a lot of the more populist, ethno-nationalist rhetoric of the ultra-right or the conservative, that resonated with many of these rural folks. So I think that too is pretty attractive and helped us understand this change.
Have you heard of Bill Bishop and the concept of the big sort?
Yes, vaguely.
So Bill Bishop, roughly for the viewers, says that roughly since the 1990s, could go back earlier, I'm picking the 90s, Americans have been sorting themselves out. They've been moving to communities, and what we're getting is more of a people live in like-minded ideological communities. So you are conservative in San Francisco, you move to Iowa. You are a Liberal in Texas, you move to Los Angeles. And while there is some debate on if people are intentionally moving and saying, I want to go to a place where everyone votes like me, or if they're more attracted to values signals or lifestyle signals. And then when they move to the area, over time, they gradually adopt the voting patterns of their neighborhood. I'm not too concerned about that. I'm really just trying to get at, and we talked about this in the early thing, is the big sort real? Is it happening? Are people more ideologically divided? Are they sorting themselves out, or are they not? Because I have a few professors who I showed them the map of the big sort and they hold up their hand and said, I reject your map. What is the public to think? Sounds like you guys are saying rurality is part of social identity and that the big sort is happening, and you literally just watched part of it. Am I getting this wrong, or is there something to this?
Want me to start?
Sure.
So our data for this paper was quantitative data assembled from a variety of sources. There's a lot of rural sociology research done up here, databases that we drew upon. Most of it came from the Census Bureau, actually. So we were actually looking at, IRA's 99 counties. So those patterns that we're identifying there emerged in the data. And so we actually were trying to explain the vote shift in each county and correlating it with a variety of things. But the items that really jumped out as significant was rurality, right? There's a measure of rurality, how large the county is, and then how distant the county is from a large metropolitan area. So there's a standard measure. It's called the Rural Urban Continuum Codes. They're widely used up here.
There are 5 different kind of gradation or continuum from very urban to very rural.
Yeah.
5 different categories.
With a total of 9. Actually, it winds up being a total of 9 when they get the whole shebang in here. But Iowa doesn't have like the largest category. We don't have a large urban area in Iowa. We don't have one. We have Des Moines, which falls into the second code. And then we go all the way to these tiny counties that have less than 1,000 people. But what we found is that mattered, right? That the size of the swing from the 2008, 2012 vote for Obama to the swing to the 2016 vote for Donald Trump, that the Republican share of the vote in each county was influenced. In fact, that was like the biggest influence was how rural the county was. And then how white it was. And oddly enough, we found that it was the whiter the county. So it wasn't counties that were directly experiencing demographic change, or to use the language that Congressman Steve King would point to, that there was a replacement of sort of the native population with outsiders, white and non-white, that the whiteness was like the higher the percentage of white, the larger the swing. And then the final one was education, that the lower the overall level of educational attainment in the county, the greater the swing. And so the Trump vote, the size of the swing at the county level here in Iowa, was explained by the rurality, by whiteness, and by education. And I think that's it, correct? I didn't reread it today, so does that sound right, Ann?
Yeah.
And I think you said you found the trend continued. Am I getting that wrong with this study? Let me read the introduction, then I'll ask you about that and how they two relate. The rise of populism on the political right in the U.S. and Europe in recent decades reflects a significant shift in political culture. This populism has been associated with the rejection of mainstream politics and increased hostility towards immigrants, racialized minorities, and other marginalized groups who are seen as threats to economic security and hegemonic social identities. In the U.S. heartland, several key states flipped from Democrat to Republican in 2016, sealing Trump's win and leading to widespread debates about populist political attitudes in the region. This analysis draws from focus group discussions with community leaders in rural and micropolitan Iowa to understand how local discourses about economics and social change intersect with rising populist politics. 3 characteristics of community life emerged as areas of concern among these groups: economic destabilization, changes in social composition, and a profound sense of rurality. Our findings reveal how populism and identity movements on the political right are integrated with heartland political culture, contributing to the recent electoral successes of right-wing populist candidates. The discussion concludes with the recommendations to promote a progressive and inclusive agenda. Did you find that the trend has continued in your 2022 study, that it hasn't shifted back liberal? In fact, it's kind of gone right and stayed right and maybe even pushed even further to the right as time's gone on?
Yeah, I think that was, it was a different perspective that we were looking at through this article, through these conversations with people. But in a way, it was just kind of a way of backing up or kind of reinforcing some of our quantitative findings from the statistics and Census Bureau, et cetera. But yeah, I think that people's, and this was, we were doing a lot of these interviews actually just before COVID. So in 2019, we didn't quite finish. We had some alliance lined up for 2020, but unfortunately we're not able to do those. But in 2019, so it was before the next round of the presidential and general elections. And so this was top on people's minds, and it was a real hot topic and an issue for people to talk about. And there's variation. You cannot generalize about communities or groups, and that too is quite interesting. So I, in particular, because I have a lot of interest in gender issues, was looking at through a gender lens and seeing how people were describing the election, for example, and how they were seeing Trump and some of the issues that were associated with Trump, and how that also shaped people's issues. So in some cases, it was dividing households where the woman would be voting in one, and the man would be voting for another candidate. So it was, kind of interesting to look at even some of these divisions. But overall, it was very, very, tense, and people were very it was a hot topic, let's say.
So, right in, I'm sorry.
Well, if I may, so like I think of the states that had been instrumental to the 2016 Republican presidential win. Iowa is one of the few that stayed the same, and I think we're the only state where each one of certainly the congressional districts, and I think even each county, I think it actually turned out that there are only, I think it's 6 counties in Iowa that voted Democrat. And I think they voted Democrat, in each election. And it's really interesting. It wasn't a huge difference between 2016 and 2020, but the red counties, the counties that have voted Republican, had a big swung even more. And I think every blue county swung more blue. So it wasn't huge, but you could see that the trend, it kept going. And that's what we found when we talked to people that again, they just describe how being moderate. I mean, people, again, like we found very few people that we interviewed. They were professionals often, or at least public leaders, or well-known farmers, and really the county extension agent helped find them and helped organize all of this, of course. And but very few people would ever voice like pride in being intolerant or pride in rejecting others, but they were very much able to report how incidents were occurring in their community that signaled division and ongoing division and polarization. Right.
Yeah. From the bar scene to the church, to the schools, to their neighbors, to
card clubs breaking up.
Yeah. So it was a very divisive.
Yeah.
Probably continues to be so.
So we wound up going to one of the counties, Howard County, which I think, Ann, right, that's the county in America that swung the most, right? It was just a massive swing, like 50%.
Northern part of the state, just on the Minnesota-Iowa border.
So we went there. We went to some other counties where the swing wasn't quite as large, but again, like people, very interesting. Like people described how the Democrat-Republican divide, which was probably of long standing, but if you know anything about Iowa Republicans and Iowa Democrats, they weren't polar. They weren't like people you wouldn't be talk to or something, right? There were people
Yeah.
you were neighbors with, went to church with, your kids
Right.
were racing sport teams. A lot of these towns only have one high school, so you can't, you know what I mean? Like we don't have class-based high schools or something. It's all, we're all in this together, right? And but people described churches that after the 2016 election, if the pastor came out pro-Trump, that it just sort of like there was a great sort going on even within congregations, that people would leave the church, and that if another pastor would say, "Hey, I'm inclusive, I'm okay with, you know, whatever the out groups were in the MAGA universe, if they express support for that, then you'd get, you know, again, people switching one congregation to another to make it work. And again, like long-term friendship networks breaking up, families breaking up,
Like a civil war.
like it really like a cold, something like a micro scale cold civil war. Yeah. And then, you know, just a kind of uncomfortable, like again, the bar scene, just, you know, you know, like people being like, I don't think they said like the bar was like either pro or anti-Trump, but the big idea was that it was no longer right if you were a long-term Democrat or long-term Republican. Like many Democrats became Trump supporters, right? And they identified as that. And that, you know, you would get these circles at a bar that would show up with some regularity. And if you were different, you know, from the other side, you wouldn't want to go, right? You'd face hostility. So, yeah.
Wow. So it sounds like the famous Iowa moderation, as I think the two you described when we were talking earlier, of at the end of the day, you could shake a hand with the person, right? And part ways. Sounds like that's dying and started dying in 2016. Am I getting that right?
I'd say stressed, probably.
Stressed.
I think we have a stress test underway. I don't think
I'm sorry. Going off the description, the two you just gave the last 2 minutes, I think the word is really stressed, not just stressed.
I would say it would be
continuing tension, right?
Yeah.
Because they still have that moderation in their
Yes.
in the backs of their heads, but
and
But they don't hang out with each other in their private lives anymore.
we're still the Iowa nice.
maybe that's it. I would not. But like maybe it's just the people I helped this interview, but they tended, again, I don't think there was anyone who boasted like really strongly of intolerance. Like I'm
Sure.
They were
But didn't-
very polite,
Not publicly.
and there were people across the political divide at the table with us, and they were still able to talk to each other. And so I think we'll be able to say it's broken if we have one of these focus groups again, and one political party won't show up, or one. You know what I mean? If that happens,
sure, but
leaves the room because we can't. That didn't happen. So that's why I think it's stressed, right, Ann? Would you say, rather than broken?
You got done talking about how everybody gets along, and then at the end of the thing, you were talking about how now people come in segregated clusters in the bar.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound good. I mean, just going off your own words, I wouldn't call that a slight dip. That seems like your culture's being ripped out.
And looking at the current situation, like we're in the present here, and you know, we're gearing up, as you well know, we're gearing up for the 2024. So the landscape has changed because of the caucus deal, and Biden running. But now a lot of the Republican presidential candidates are beginning to flock to Iowa, which is kind of feeding fuel on the fire in some ways. Because I think too, our politicians are positioning themselves alongside some of these candidates, and they want to, you know, be chummy with DeSantis or Trump or Pence or whoever.
Right.
So I think it's kind of being refueled now, and also still divided and polarized.
Let me ask you a technical question. I think you said when you both were looking at the data, you found it was not just the Republicans who went further out. It was the blue counties and red counties became more blue and red, you found in Iowa. So I see a lot of professors saying it's 90% the Republicans and a tiny bit Democrats being more polarized. Does that seem accurate to you guys based upon your own research?
Yeah, I would, you know, if you look at like Pew has pretty good data about political polarization, and it's right, and like you know how it's mapped, right? It's like there's a let me try to if I can get this. I can't get the right term for it. It's out-hating. It's out-hating of the opposite party is called. Can't remember the term for it right now. I'm really embarrassed. But if you overlap on the bell, right? There's like a bell curve,
Right.
and there used to be a lot of overlap between the parties, and that overlap is going away, and that over time we're finding fewer and fewer sort of moderates in the Republican Party, and so there you go, right there. Good for you. That's it. Yeah. And so you're seeing that there's this difference that's occurring. And I think it is probably both. But the, And the term what's the term I'm looking for? Why can't I think of it? It's the one, so there's the term where it's kind of like it's a measure of out-hating. It would be like, do you view the opposite party as acceptable, or do you view them as people that you could hang out with, or would you mind if your daughter married a person?
So less tolerant.
Much,
Less tolerant for
and that the other party is now viewed as an existential threat, and I would say that's definitely going to be true on both sides. And it isn't that the positions. I think that the data. I'm not sure it's this one, but I think data shows that there's been, like, for example, the one that's on my door. So right now downstairs is the one that, Anne, I don't know if you saw that there's an interest right now in understanding why men aren't applying to universities.
right.
That there's a big gender gap.
Women.
I've seen that.
And that I have on my door a map that, and it's Pew, and it shows that 2015 was the last year that the majority of Republicans agreed with the vast majority of Democrats that colleges and universities are good for America. And that after the 2016 election, the majority, it's like 2/3 of Republicans say that colleges and universities are not good for America. And so Democrats haven't changed much, but Republicans have really changed on that.
And that's behind a lot of the legislation we're seeing too.
Right.
For instance, DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is being attacked in higher education with funding, with attacks on different programs. So I think they're clumping together the liberal, indoctrinating higher education professors like us, maybe, with ways of cutting budgets and areas that are really attacking, which I think is very, very detrimental long term. We need education for our future.
Yeah.
That's a very good answer. I hadn't heard anybody point that out. You're the first professors I've seen mention that, okay, when it comes to how you feel about the other party and the distrust, they're probably both the same. On other measures, the Republicans more. I haven't seen anybody bring that up, that differentiation. Most of the stuff is just, it's all Republicans. Democrats a little bit, but it's mostly all them. I've never heard anybody break it up like this. So thank you very much. That's a new data point. Haven't found. And
There we go.
all of this reading and all 70 interviews. So, hey, we learn something new every day.
There it is.
Wow. Yeah, good for you.
Let me ask you though. This is the meat and potatoes question, if I can.
We've already had those.
So I want to show you the map that has just strong opinions. Here it is. Give it 1 second to pull up.
Yeah. That's the great sword again. Yeah.
I had it. Sorry.
Get a lot of data there.
I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
I jumped into this with a little bit of a background, and I'm a data researcher in my professional life, so I'm kind of good at doing this, except when I lose. There we go. Okay, here we go.
I saw that.
This is from the New York Times, came out in 2016, Counties that voted for the Republican or Democratic presidential candidate by 20 percentage points or more. How large is the divide between red and blue in America? This is what Bill Bishop was talking about. This is the New York Times backing it up a decade later. By the way, NPR has also backed this up. 538 has backed this up. A lot of people have backed it up and said, yeah, there's something going on. So if I may, I'd like to explain the map to you, and then I want to ask your reaction. So the map, the top left, very top all the way to the left, it's about 50% gray. So red means don't even run here if you're not a Republican. You have no chance. Republicans win here by 20 percentage points over the other candidate at the county level. So these maps are finely grained. Blue means don't even run here if you're a Democrat. Democrats win by 20 percentage points. These are called landslide election counties. Gray, though, means sometimes we vote for McCain, and then sometimes Barack Obama has the right message for us. And we think that speaks to us and where America's at. And then you can go over to 96, 2000, the next row is 2004, 2008, 2012. That map at the bottom is 2016. And I've talked to a couple professors who say the trends are only more exacerbated now. But if you look at the map at the bottom, 2016, it's the bigger one, and you compare it to the map in the top left, almost all of the gray's been completely wiped out. And what they're saying is that people are moving and or ideologically sorting themselves into these hardcore districts where they don't listen to the other side ever, don't even bother running here. And where we can see that in the 90s, we actually had a competitive landscape for most of America, and now we have anything but. I've seen professors look at this and go, I reject your map. Is this true? Is this not true? Does the big sort exist? Or is all this data fake and made up?
Well, is this also a result of urbanization, growing urban populations, and outmigration from rural areas?
Sure.
So the concentration of those rural conservative votes, Wyoming, Nevada.
And even in the reddest state, including Iowa now, there are, again, it's the urban and university counties that are still blue. But having said that, and then there's gerrymandering that goes on that would be part of this too.
And that becomes, problematic.
But I think that there's something to this, and that there clearly is something to this. That there's different ways to explain it. I don't know that it is actually a great, it depends on what you mean by the great sort. Like are people saying, I'm out of here? Like anecdotally, I know people that went out of Iowa because of they have a gay child or they have a trans child, and they're no longer able to get abortion services here, or afraid that they're not going to be able to, and that these really, but that's just anecdotal. Now, how much that? Now, I've heard this about Florida. I've heard it other places,
as well as people of color. I tend to be out migrating from some of these areas.
Yeah, I would bet. Like from what we learned, Anne, I don't remember people talking about that. They talked about, though, like a lot of the respondents talked about concerns about their children leaving and not coming back.
Right.
And their worries weren't about political policy or that they're not comfortable around Democrats or Republicans. A lot of it had to do with remember that stuff. There's all that stuff about how our kids want to go. They go away to the big city. They go away to college, and they come back to these small towns. They don't have the amenities, right? We don't have good restaurants, or we don't have bike. I remember bike trails came up at one point, or cool microbreweries. There we are.
Cool restaurants.
And so there was a frustration expressed that that there's a kind of a rural brain drain underway. Our data kind of shows that, right? And so I don't know how much of that. So I think I think there's a lot going into it, but the effect of it is probably true. The effect of it is probably what Bishop and others have noted, that there is something like division underway. I listen to AM radio all the time, AM 1040. I listen to Catholic radio all the time. It's my go-to in my car, and I can't tell you how often we hear, like on AM 1040 here in Iowa, the big sort of farm and truck driver station, I suppose. But you hear people talk about that. This is God's country, or this is the place where if you want to live free, come here to a red state or come here to Iowa where Republicans are in charge and you can be free. And we're hearing that definitely from people like Ron DeSantis talking in those terms, like wanting, at least claiming that they want to encourage something like out-migration of the opposite political party and in-migration of those within. And I think California, I think this is happening too, right?
Who said they want to encourage that?
Oh, I think this is definitely that. Like, I think so. What I'm hearing is like Ron DeSantis' statements about Florida being the place where woke goes to die, right? So don't come here. Like, I think I heard it was Scott, right? Senator Scott, Rick Scott, the former governor, just last week saying, "Don't come here." I think
yes. There are many conservative governors who said, "Yeah, we don't want
encouraging them to leave."
Right?
Yeah.
So
you're right.
You won't be comfortable here.
Yeah.
So and then I think your state, California, right? I think that Gavin Newsom said something along the lines of that he wants to be a safe haven or a kind of a refuge state, right?
Yeah.
For those on the left.
For abortion access and for LGBTQ rights.
And
state money for that.
And it may well be that these wedge issues are no longer being used just to shape elections, but maybe they really are. They are very punitive, some of these laws.
I'll give you that there were Republican governors saying, if you're California or liberal, this isn't a great place for you, don't come here. Newsom never did that. However, during the recall election, Governor Newsom said that anybody who backs the recall is a white supremacist. And I got to tell you, my mom, who's full-blood Mexican, was quite offended at that statement. So it's happening on both sides. Just want to put that out there. So you believe the big sort is real? Something like this might be happening. We're not sure. People, it's everybody just moving geographically. Maybe it's partly that. And maybe, like you said, we're losing our young people. We're losing our LGBTQ people. We're losing our immigrants. And then that just leaves
educated people,
the educated people, and that kind of just leaves everybody left behind, who becomes even more groupthink, hardcore conservative.
I think also this has shifted. It's a complicated landscape. It's not necessarily, it's not up or down, black or white. But I think COVID, actually, they're seeing data and trends now where people were more likely to move back to, or to more rural areas, or at least ex-urban areas during COVID. So, and leaving the big cities with the crime and the lack of, access for transportation and all the problems, et cetera, with big cities. So it would be interesting to see this map. That's not necessarily, I think some of it's reflected in the politics of 2022, for example, kind of post-COVID, post-pandemic, to see how that's also.
Yeah, I don't have the map. I was told by a professor who researched into this that it's even worse on the map, that the 2016 one is even more polarized when you go to 2022. But I don't have that map to show. You're right.
So if I think what we would say is that if it's showing up in the map and the map is accurate, it's real in effect. It may not be caused by an intentionality to generate polarized or one-party states or one-party districts. I'm not sure that that's it.
Yeah. There's no evidence showing that people are going, I want to convert Nebraska into all Republicans. Hey guys, let's all move. They're not even sure if it's you're moving because you want people who vote like you, or you're attracted to a particular lifestyle change, and you adopt the voting when you get there. There's a debate on that. I'm more just concerned if, as Americans, we can say it's happening or it's not happening, because many professors who studied political polarization have not heard of the big sort and have never seen these maps before. And yet they're academic professors on political polarization, and they have no idea about this concept. And so I'm trying to find out. I mean, if there's a debate in academia, what good does the public have? So I'm trying to find out, is this real? Is this not happening? I've had professors say, no, that's real, not real. I've had other professors say, I've never heard it. Then I have other professors like you guys going, yeah, I studied geography. This is definitely real. So you can see how confused a layperson would be. What am I supposed to think? Why is there so many different opinions in academia?
Well, it's the complexity here. So it's an easy framing in terms of Republican Democrat partisanship, but that's too easy. It's much more complex. So
It's economic issues,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
jobs. I mean, it's
a
some
sense
of
of
the people we
place,
talk
right?
to.
Yeah.
Their kids, they grew up, they might have gotten a community college education, 2-year degree or 4-year degree, and there just weren't job opportunities in rural Nebraska, rural Iowa. So I think it's economic opportunities as well. And land prices it's hard to start a farm in the rural areas because land is so expensive, equipment is really expensive, so a younger generation is not gonna land in those areas.
That makes sense. Let me ask you 2 follow-up questions. Do you see this trend getting better over time naturally, short of a intervention, or a lot of people have said national marriage counseling is a term? If there is no, that was when Marjorie Taylor Greene said we need national divorce. There was a Utah governor who said we need marriage counseling.
There we go. I'm all for that. Didn't work for me.
Didn't work. I was going to say. Usually people don't go to marriage counseling. Yeah. Way too late, right? And then
It's like, oh my.
Basically, let's work together to get a good separation.
Exactly. What is there? So basically, the question is 2 parts. Do you think it's going to get better naturally on its own? Like, hey, it'll just peter out and people will calm down. Or does there has to be an intervention to make this better? And if an intervention is necessary, what kind of intervention is going to get around 100 million people who've been sorting themselves over 3 decades to undo it? It's a 2-parter because we have a 2-fer.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Tag team.
Yeah. Again, like I just say, I don't know that this sorting is happening because of a desire for political unity. I'm not sure that's the reason. It's happening in effect.
Okay.
So understand the cause. So to me, it would be you have to understand the cause of polarization in order to even begin to come up with a solution to it. And I don't know.
I would also put it in the hands or in the laps of our leaders, our political leaders, who need to, demonstrate compromise. You can look at the recent, debt ceiling debates and legislation that went through, but who need to be able to go to the table and talk civilly and be, polite at least when you're dealing with the opposition. So I think that the leadership, it's iffy is if the leadership is kind of modeling that type of unity or at least civility and working together.
Fair enough.
And I don't know if that's going to happen with some of the personalities that are.
Well, okay, so let me ask you, what would marriage counseling look like? If you're going to marriage counsel all of America that's been sorting from 1992 over 3 decades, now we're looking at 1 to 2 generations deep, and we're looking at the numbers of at least 100 million, maybe more. What does marriage counseling look like for that? And who's going to be that marriage counselor?
Okay, so all right, it wouldn't work unless both parties wanted to work, right? And
I don't know.
So it would. You'd have to have a desire for moderation. It would have to be an end. So instead of having my side win, I'm going to make certain that no Democrat wins. I'm going to, right, if that's it, or the other side, I'm going to make sure no Republican wins. If that's the goal, there's no way. But if you actually set as a goal, a political goal, I want inclusiveness. I want people to be heard. I want tolerance. I want to understand. I want to make good policy. Just that. I'm a politician. I want to make good policy. I want to make good policy. I want to make sure that my policy works. I want to make sure that the ends I'm aiming at can be arrived at with the policy solutions I'm pushing. In other words, if you just begin with that, marriage counseling, I'd like this to be a good marriage, right? It would have to be a desire for it. And so I think it's back to leadership. There were reports, so Iowa since 2016, we are a trifecta state where the governor has been strongly held in Republican hands now, and both houses in the legislature as well. And there have been reporting about incivility in the Iowa legislature this year. And it really is things like creating a budget, like presenting a budget. So the Republicans have a majority and they presented a budget, gave it to Democrats, apparently had no numbers in it. I was an accountant at one point, so I can't imagine the frustration that would generate. But it's so desiring a functioning politics. I have many friends who say to me, we've got to have a functioning, we can't have a one-party state. We need a functioning Republican Party. If they're Democrat, we have to have, that's the only way a plural society, a multicultural society, a society where people have, in my own work, radically contradictory notions of what the Christian God is and what it means to be a Christian, radically different notions of this. We can't talk to each other unless we want, right? We can't form a union unless we want it to work. And that's what seems to be necessary. So I'm not even sure how that would happen, but it would have to be a goal. Yeah.
Who is that person? Who's the person, if you can name anyone who has any reputation at all, it can't be some local person you've heard of and know, but somebody who has some sort of national reputation who could speak to both sides and bring them together. Can you name one person known in politics today who you think could do that?
Well, I would say Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg.
Pete Buttigieg is going to bring the Republicans in?
Yeah, they would be he's very good. I mean, if you just go by manner and content, he is actually remarkably verbal. But
he does not pull well with them. I could see Amy Klobuchar, though. She did pretty well.
Yep. So another thing that I was going to point out, which we've kind of skirted around a little bit, but just the basic demographics of this country. In Iowa, for example, we're becoming a much more brown, much less white, a lower percentage of white European ancestry population. So I think that just the demographics alone for education, for jobs, or just the outright future of our country, there needs to be more tolerance, more respect, and support for right now we have underrepresented populations, but in many parts of the country, they're the majority. Of color. So I think the point about just the future and demographics for these different areas of our society, we're going to have to get along. We're going to have to, accept the reality of how we're going to have people work in the workforce and have people come and enroll in our higher education.
I hope so. I talked to somebody and he said, hey, there's a lot of Latinos moving into town. And I go, great. Are they dating, marrying people, working at the same jobs, going to schools? Or are they largely isolated to the edge of town and work exclusively as farm laborers and nobody actually hangs out with them? Those are two different depictions on if we're going to have a cohesive society. That's neither here nor there. I always tell people, look at the movie Farmingville, where only 100 Mexicans showed up in a small town in upstate New York, and you could see how real Americans reacted to diversity. These people thought they were so liberal and so diverse, and they couldn't hack it. Every city in California has 100 Mexicans. They dropped 100 into one place called Farmingville, New York. They lost their mind, and those were liberals. So I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I would love to see that. Let me ask you about this, though. We're talking about the future. Have you heard of Norman Ornstein? So Norman Ornstein's a demographer, and this is what he says. I want to repeat a statistic I use in every talk. By 2040 or so, 70% of Americans will live in 15 states, meaning 30% of Americans will choose 70 senators. And the 30% will be older, whiter, more rural, and more male than the 70%, unsettling to say the least. He's basing that on the U.S. Census, which projects that trend out to the year 2045, or when we are projected to have a space base on Mars. No, I'm not exaggerating. So is this a good sign or a bad sign that things are going to get worse?
I think it's the reality. However, it's the future. So good or bad, depending on where you're coming from. But I think this also illustrates some of the flaws within our electoral process.
Sure. Let's just
how these rural states can have, an unrepresentative or disproportionate amount of power. That's why there's so much money going into the USDA and the ag reform bills.
When we're talking about polarization, picture it's the year 2030, and 15 states have 70% of the population, and they said, we want this person as president and these laws. And then 35 states who only have 30% of the population said, no, we disagree. And since we have more senators and more electoral college distribution, we get the person that we want and you get nothing. Would that be good or bad for political polarization?
I don't know. Again, might I just suggest a couple books?
Sure.
One of them is by Jill Quidagno. And the title of it, her most famous book is called The Color of Welfare. But really all of Jill Quidagno, she's president of the American Sociological Association. And then the other scholar is Theda Skocpol. Both of them have done work on sort of the American political policy system. And like Anne was just saying, the electoral system. And they, like Quidagno studied the difficulties of passing Social Security and how the Color of Welfare was really about the long-term electoral consequences of passing the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act in the mid-1960s. And her argument is that, there is a kind of non-democratic or undemocratic, or let's say less than perfectly democratic element in America. It is linked to the Senate and to the way that seniority is handed up. Seniority determines who has control of committees. And she really, at a kind of, so for example, our senior senator is Chuck Grassley, whose mother was born in the 19th century, right? And that's not a joke or an exaggeration. His mother was born in the 19th century. And he was sort of the linchpin in determining healthcare policy during the the effort to get Obamacare passed. And that the way that the structure works, and Quidagno is really good at laying this out, is that it has to do with the seniority system in terms of giving power to particular senators, and then the kind of less. It's not representative, right? So we don't wind up with one person, one vote. We wind up with some states, like my home state of South Dakota, where it's 800,000 people, and we have as much political influence as 40 million people in your state, right?
Right.
And so you don't. So that would be So if you look structurally again at a kind of complex, the complexity of the structural confines that policy has to work its way through. This isn't good. Of course it's not good. Of course it's not good.
I have to ask. My opinion doesn't matter. I can't go, hey, everybody, I feel strongly. The only way I can get people to listen if I can go, I got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 professors who say it's bad. Then people listen and they stop arguing. So my opinion doesn't matter. I have to ask obvious questions because I've tried to have this conversation going, come on, it's bad. You don't know what you're talking about? Well, I got 50 professors who say so. Oh, now I'll shut up and listen. That's the way it is these days. They just don't, you got to overwhelm them with data. Let me ask you, that was a great answer. Thank you. The term that I see in popular conversation, not academia, is TOM, tyranny of the minority. And basically what they're saying is that you have these small states. It used to be about making everybody equal, but now these small states have a fraction of the population and they're controlling the whole government, and it's undemocratic. And that's why we had Amy Coney Barrett get into the Supreme Court and Brett Kavanaugh and George W. Bush and Donald Trump. And people, especially in California, are starting to wake up to that and become very angry when they realize unless you change the Constitution, it's never going to change. Unless you can convince 35 states to politically neuter themselves and say, hey, I know you've had outsized influence and the ability to have an influence in Congress. Can you remove all that for the good of the country so you'll never have influence and people can just ignore you? And you got to get 35 states to do that before you could ever make the change. When we start telling the Californians, they get very skeptical of the Constitution. Just got to say.
Well, I think they're beginning to make inroads a little bit on that, and Iowa's maybe a case study. They don't want us as the first Democratic or the first caucus.
True.
We've been demoted. Iowa, the state has been demoted for just those reasons.
True. California tried to move the primary there, and then other states immediately moved their date ahead of California to swing back.
I think they're eroding that argument a little bit.
Did you guys ever see signs of polarization in Iowa before Trump? The big sorting started in 1992. We certainly had some polarization in the early thousands. The Obama presidency saw some controversy. Did you see any signs, or did it seem to just kind of blow up with Trump?
I think that there's a really long history in Iowa of sort of both parties, right? I mean, if you go back and look at who was senator, who was congressperson, who was governor. When I arrived here, I can't remember who. I think Chuck Culver. 2004. I can't remember. Anyway, but we've had both Democrat and Republican governors, and Democrat and we had Harkin, Democrat Senator Harkin, and so it wasn't like Oklahoma or Wyoming, where it really is just solid red and always red. It flipped back and forth, and I think, and again, like the policy positions, I think Grassley's claim to fame as a young senator back in the 70s or 80s or 60s, whenever, I think it was 70s is probably when he probably was a congressperson first, but he was famous as a cost cutter and being, holding a hammer up on national television saying this hammer costs $400 or something, right? I mean,
I remember that.
Yeah.
My grandpa showed me that.
Yeah. And, I think he's 90 now. He's very close to 90. And again, it's just a different world now. And being a Republican in Iowa means something different than it did.
I agree.
We used to be the education state, right? That's our coin. If you look at the Iowa quarter, it's the education state.
We were also one of the first states to allow gay marriage.
Yeah. Hey.
Marriage
2010.
Act.
Yeah.
So we've focused so much on
and now we've just had a don't say gay. That's not the title of it, but that's the popular term for it. It just passed the legislature and signed into law last week. So.
I'm not going to bear down on that. I need to keep it kind of like on the major subject because we're on YouTube.
Yeah.
So there are, you got to watch your P's and Q's. I hope that you found this was a fair interview and not gotcha journalism. I didn't try to trick you guys. You got to say your piece. Do you know anybody else who might be willing to be part of an honest conversation? They could be academics. They could not be academics. Is there anybody you can think of who's, so-and-so might be willing?
Right, Jill Quidagno. If you can get her, she'd be fantastic.
I'll reach out to her. Jill Quidagno. We got her up on screen.
Yeah.
Quidagno. That sounds Filipino. I'll find out. Okay. Yeah.
She can think of?
Catherine,
Catherine Kramer.
Rural Resentment.
Yeah, Catherine Kramer.
Catherine Kramer at UW-Madison.
And then the person who's coming here in the fall.
Shannon Monat.
Shannon Monat would be very good. Yeah, she'd be wonderful, actually.
So Catherine, Kramer.
Yes.
And she's a professor?
For some reason, I want to say C-R. Yeah, she wrote the,
right, C.
I think it's Cramer, and she, Politics of Resentment, right? Is the title.
Politics of Resentment. And then who was V.W. Madison?
No, at Kramer is at UW-Madison.
Oh, sorry.
Political science. Yeah, that's all right. That's
got it. Okay, I will definitely reach out to Catherine Kramer and Jill Quidagno.
And then
Shannon Monat. Monnat.
Monat. Shannon Monat. Where's she at?
There's rural sociology.
Penn State.
No,
Not Penn State.
no, Syracuse.
Is she?
I'll find her. Okay. Shannon Monat, Jill Quidago, and Catherine Kramer.
Yeah.
If you're watching this, I'm going to do my best to get a hold of you and try to convince you to do an interview. Thank you so much. Last question for you guys.
Uh-oh.
This is kind of a tough one. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene came out and said, hey, we need a national divorce because we're so polarized and we can't get along with each other, there's a lot of controversy, and she didn't explain everything. Some people like her, some people don't. That's not the question. What I noticed was the media for the first month said, oh, Marjorie, there's no polarization. You're an idiot. And I knew that was wrong. And the second month after the conversation didn't die down, there was a new wave of articles. And they said, oh, yeah, there's polarization, but it's because of social media, the media, and extreme politicians are gerrymandering. And they completely left out the big sort. Here's my question for the two of you. Politicization of the media, you could say maybe 2000 and 2010. Social media started becoming a big influence, maybe 2015, 2017. Extreme politicians were really the last 2 years of Trump's administration. And gerrymandering really came out for the first time in 2000, but it wasn't that impactful until 2010. That's what political historians are saying. So the big sort predates all of those things by 20 years. How come everybody who talked about political polarization across all media mentioned everything else but the big sort when the big sort predates all of them by 20 years?
Well, maybe they were looking at a different era. The Reagan, I mean, a lot of this started actually back in the 80s, and the liberal push and tax reduction and in terms of the economy and politics. So maybe they're kind of referring more to the Reagan, and it was also very divided and polarizing. Maybe the Bush administration too. And then after 9/11, we kind of, worked together a little bit better. So that's speculation.
And if I would, I just, if you're serious about understanding anything, the complexity of the warp and weft of a social system requires a lot of study, and you have to start somewhere. And if something like the Great Sort is important, it'll emerge, right? It'll become ever clearer in the data as time goes on. And the other thing I would say, I not everything maps onto a divide between, the polarization between Republicans and Democrats. It's part of a story, but the bigger story is kind of like what Ann was just saying. I mean, we're in the midst of a reconstruction of global capitalism. It's been underway for a long time. It has all kinds of political and social impacts. And
social
identities are altering.
Changing dramatically.
And as you say, the media landscape is altering and so on. So it just again, if you're serious, it just takes a long time, and you have to enter somewhere. And then you have to hope that as you begin unraveling it, eventually you get to the things that really matter, but it takes time to do it often. So
right. But the big sort was mentioned by national media chains 6 months, 9 months, 12 months prior. And then after Marjorie Taylor Greene makes her tweet, they all forget about their own reporting and they focus on every other factor except the big sort, to the point that they basically don't mention it at all when it has the largest track record of documentation and being reported on. Isn't that at least a little bit strange? You've been talking about this one thing for the longest time, and then when the topic is super relevant, you accidentally blank out on it?
I don't think it's strange. I think that, again, the logic of whatever clickbait headline media, whatever the revenue model is today for this, and we both know how much our journalism department is struggling. I mean, everybody's struggling in the media landscape. It's hard. And, it's always been a kind of topic of the moment, topicality, emotion. And I think that's, we don't have a long memory in the media. You can't have hardly, right? You're not going to get clicks possibly. So I wouldn't say it's a bias as much as just the way, you'd have to talk to journalists about that. But the one thing I would say is that of all of the people I would seek for reasoned analysis of the future of politics in America, I don't think I would seek out someone with a history of inflammatory tweeting. It's not meant as, again, that's what we teach people to do, is to reason, right? And to be able to provide reasons for the positions that you take. And so just being emotional, again, that's not what we do. Maybe that's what the media does. It's certainly what certain brands of politicians do. But you and I both know that's not serious. Seriousness, it requires time and effort. There's socially necessary labor time that goes into the production of things. And there needs to be reasons. What are the reasons behind the position that you have, right? And then to be able to document that with again, if we want our policy positions to work, if we want our politics to work, if we want governance to work, if we want our society to form a more perfect union, you've got to find a way to reason and research our way into better policy. It's got to be done. So that would be my stance. So that's
how do we de-sort America?
Again, you have to understand the causes of it, and then I don't know. I mean, again, it depends. Depends what the causes are. You have to address the causes. So
let me throw out a theoretical scenario. Purely theoretical. Let's say this is an alternate universe, and we know for a fact that going back to the 90s, people on the left and people on the right just don't like each other for values, for lifestyle, and every year it gets worse. And that's the major reason. And they've been sorting for 30 years, and that was the start. And as they get more sorted, some of them say, well, let's say do gerrymandering so we can hold on to our sword. And then some say, let's do more social media extreme titles so we can hold on to our sword. And let's do more extreme politicians. But it all comes back to, I don't like you. You're left. I'm red. And I'm going to go move myself into an ideological community. And that is the main driver. If, I get it's an if, I get we can't tell, a lot of factors to tell. But in this alternate universe, if after all the research it came out that was the main driver for 30 years, at 100 million person level, how would you de-sort that in this alternate universe?
Yeah, I guess I would have issues with some of the basic assumptions with that. But one of the things that is changing, and everything changes, that's one thing we can count on, is change and dynamics. I think, and we work with young people. We teach, we're in higher education, we work with young people a lot, at least of this age group now, the Gen Zs. And there's such different thinking now about not just politics, but about, how to get along with people and tolerance of people who don't have the same sexual orientation or color, skin, or language or religion. That I maybe that's a little bit more optimistic, but that's my hope, is that future generations, if they can get unstuck from, this world that we've created, they're much more environmentalist, environmentally oriented. So I see some hope and change through the tolerance and respect and foresight that and they're a savvy generation. They've been exposed to a lot of different things in their lifetime. So I think that might bring about some of this, what you call sorting, or the big sort, because of the younger generation.
We can hope. Just the last thing, just to say that it doesn't. I don't think that it works that way in reality. I don't think that Republicans don't like each other too, right? I mean, there's a famous line from Emile Durkheim, a great sociologist, and he says, "Look, in a community of saints where no one really commits a crime, small little misdemeanors will be treated as a major sacrilege, right? That you're going to create crime." And, if you put a whole bunch of people who are Republican together, and they don't have Democrats in their midst, the differences within the Republican coalition are going to become apparent. And the same is true of Democrats. You take a bunch of Democrats and you're going to find that some are pro-business, some are pro-regulation, some are anti-regulation, some are, right? There's all kinds of different fractures within each of these coalitions. So it isn't right and left. And maybe our system does require two parties. I think it's built that way, where there's a two-party dominance, but the content of the parties can change over time. And
that's fair. That's
yeah,
fair.
Yeah.
I would like to point out this one poll from Pew Research Center, October 2017, partisan divide on political values grows even wider. October 5th, 2017, Pew Research Center. What it shows is that going back to 1994 to the year 2017, the difference of Americans faced on race, religion, school attendance, education, age, gender, basically petered out and has stayed the same over the last 30 years. When we look at political party, it is the only one that has doubled. So you can see all those lines going kind of straight. That's every other way to categorize a person. And then that one line that shoots way up to the top, that's political party polarization. The Pew Research Center is saying that's the one form of identity and the only one that's doubled since 1994.
And I think this is a key term. It's an identity now. It isn't just a membership in a political association
Sure.
That promotes reasoned policy. It's an identity. And that's the change, right? And maybe that's what we need. It's just people with a hunger for reasoned policy and effective governance that are going to realize we need people from a variety of value positions working together to find solutions for the problems we have. You know?
I agree. I hope so. I would like to see AOC say, hey, Trump had a few ideas. I'd like to see Donald Trump say, hey, not everything AOC said was wrong. I think if we saw stuff like that, but you laugh, right? I think if we saw stuff like that, that'd be great.
Sir,
but you can't even talk about that without going,
I would say
unicorns.
Just to
say
say,
in a room together.
those are celebrity figures.
Position.
And I think that this will fix when a democracy functions as a democracy and it's everyday people, not celebrity. We should be going to people for solutions, not to celebrities, right? And so what AOC wants or what Donald Trump wants is probably a lot less important than what people in, say, Spencer, Iowa want to do about their local park or what they want to do about building a workforce or something, right? I mean, it really is on the ground. That's what democracy is, right? It's people living a free life and helping them do it is what I'm hoping we have to do. So.
Liliana Mason seemed to suggest that it was about getting at what you're saying, Professor Krier, that it was about being willing to lose as long for the good of the country, for the best policy. I'm willing to occasionally lose. Sure. And when you lose that ability, we get polarization. And I don't see either party really being willing to lose. I mean, every election they're going existential threat. It's the end of everything we know if the other party wins. They've been doing that messaging for the last 8 years. They've got to totally flip that on the backs and go, you know what, guys, we're going to try hard, but it's okay if we lose. That's what both of them would have to start doing. And I haven't seen anybody say anything like that. I hope they do. I really do. Here's the last question for both of you. This is the thing I always ask every professor. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third person watching this interview. It's 5 days from now. And you're thinking to yourself, wow, that was a good interview. There was a lot there. I can't remember everything, but there was this one thing the professor said at the end, and I can't get it out of my head. What is that one thought you want a totally random person you've never met to not be able to forget 5 days from now? We'll start with Professor Oberhauser since she came in first.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I've said it yet, but what I would say is I don't think we can give up on this process. And I think there's a lot of potential and a lot of opportunities out there. So, but it's going to take hard work. It's going to take some data-driven and some scientific analysis of the issues that we're trying to address, because they are huge issues. I mean, they are existential in terms of the environment, for example. I do believe that what we're facing with climate change is existential, and that's going to change all of us. But I think that if we can apply and be our best people and draw from our best resources and our best brains in science, that we will definitely get through this, and there's a lot of positive things on the other end.
Professor Krier, what is the one thought you would like people to not be able to get out of their head 5 days from now, Professor?
Elites do well when common people fight against each other.
That's brilliant. Succinct.
We are. That's Dan, sometimes.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Sometimes, not always. No, actually, don't have them read our papers. They're all open access.
Yeah.
They're open access, so have them read our papers, and we're open for any discussion, questions, comments.
I really appreciate both of you doing this. It's been hard to get a hold of Midwestern professors located in the center of America. Almost all of them are on the coasts or Texas that I can get a hold of. So it was a nice data point, and both of you were detailed and in depth, and you were willing to entertain the theoretical questions. And also you provided a level of understanding in more depth than we had seen in some of the other interviews. So I thank you very much. This has been highly informative.
Oh, very good. We appreciate that. And we're no longer just the flyover state.
Nope. You're my favorite professors. Don't tell the other professors, okay?
Come on and see us in Ames and Des Moines.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you both for being here. I will email you a copy of the video in a few hours. If you have any other recommendations, I'd appreciate it. But I got 3 and I love it. Thank you so much.
Wow.
And I'll email you shortly. And I want to say thank you to both of you coming out.
We look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Very good.
Virtual high five before we go.
Yeah, virtual high five.
Virtual high five.
So,